Good morning, everyone. I want to start off by discussing something called discrimination in the workplace. Many of us have experienced that level of discrimination in the workplace. It happens for so many different reasons. It's never fair, but it does happen. And sometimes we just find ourselves out of work for an extended period of time, whether it's through injury, illness, or other personal issues. It can become almost impossible sometimes to find someone who's willing to take you on. And sadly, for some of the 12 million European cancer survivors, doing exactly that is not easy. Returning to work, especially after any illness, and especially something as serious and life-threatening like cancer, really does take guts. It's physically and mentally such a strain. For many, though, going back to work is also vital for their recovery. And in the best case scenarios, employers do make adjustments for the individual. The right also of someone living with cancer to go back to work is also protected by law. The EU recognises cancer as a disability, so it will be discriminatory if they're not treated properly. But many cancer survivors have a 1.4 times higher risk of unemployment compared to their healthy peers. With that, let me all wish you a very good morning. And thank you for joining us for this webinar. My name is Mariam Zaidi, and I will be your moderator for the next 1.5 hours, where we will be discussing supporting cancer patients and survivors in the workplace and the challenges and best practices across Europe. Now, today's webinar is brought to you by MAC, the MEPs Against Cancer group in the European Parliament, which is also supported by ECL, the Association of European Cancer Leagues. Now, MAC will be celebrating 20 years of fighting to ensure better treatment and care for cancer patients. And ECL is made up of 34 regional and national cancer leagues. Now, May the 1st, which is obviously tomorrow, also marks International Workers' Day. And that's why today's MAC debate will look at the challenges and the opportunities for cancer sufferers and survivors. We will look at the legislation and policy across the EU27 that really support those living with cancer to retain and return to their livelihoods. And soon I'll be joined by MEPs and experts from across the European Commission, employer and patient groups, and also survivor groups themselves. Now, in terms of our agenda, I will soon hand over to the chair of MAC, and then you will hear from the expert who also have helped authored the European Commission study on job retention and return to work for cancer patients and survivors. I'll then ask our panelists to introduce themselves to you, and after a debate, I'll then turn to you, the audience, for a Q&A. So do have your questions ready so that I can ask the experts. Now, we do have a little bit of housekeeping, so a few do's and don'ts for this debate. The webinar is being recorded. The recording will be made available on ECL's YouTube website and channel. Now, audience, you submit your questions to the speakers using the Q&A function. The questions will, of course, as I said, be answered during the Q&A session. And if you want to talk about this debate on your socials, please do mention ECL, MAC, or myself, and use any of the following hashtags: International Workers' Day, Labour's Day, MEPs Against Cancer, cancer patients, cancer survivors, and return to work. Now, with that, it's my absolute pleasure to hand over to our host MEP to set the scene. Please welcome the chair of MAC, MEP Romana Jerković, who's also the vice chair of the SAND committee, for some opening remarks. And I know she's also the chair of the MEP Cardiovascular Health Group, because I was sat next to her at a launch event that I moderated at the Parliament last week. So over to you, MEP Jerković.
Thank you, Mariam. Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a true honor to welcome you all on this webinar, and symbolically held today on the International Workers' Day. The scope of our meeting today is, on one hand, to celebrate the courage of cancer patients and survivors returning to work, and on the other hand, to point out to the problems that many of 12 million cancer survivors encounter when returning to their workplace. Almost 5 million people are diagnosed with the cancer in Europe each year, and 36% of them are of working age. And this is a staggering number and needs our attention and action. With the advancement in early detection and effective therapies, we luckily have more and more cancer survivors. And as the Commission study on job retention and return to work rightfully says, our attention needs to shift from how long people live after diagnosis to how well and how long they live. And this includes returning to work, because every patient has the right not just to survive, but also to be able to live fully and meaningfully, including at work. Every cancer patient has two dreams. First one is to survive, and the second one is to resume their ordinary life. It is their dream to return to the life they built, including their place in the workforce, not just because work pays the bills, but because they often they need work. Very often gives us purpose and sense of belonging. After exhausting treatment, cancer patients just want back that sense of the belonging and being part of the society. For many survivors, the workplace is a symbol of normalcy, a place where they can reconnect with the life beyond illness. Unfortunately, many people diagnosed with the cancer face significant challenges in their professional life after the diagnosis, and many of them face unjust discrimination. They are often facing barriers such as physical limitations, mental health struggles, stigma, and the lack of the workforce accommodations. In short, they are enduring the impossible, but no one should have fight two battles, one against cancer and another one to reclaim their place at work. Recovery should mean not only surviving cancer, but also surviving financially, surviving socially and emotionally. There are also significant impacts on employers and society as a whole. Employers are losing skilled, trained individuals who are in many cases keen to return to work, but are not supported in doing so. A cancer diagnosis does not erase a lifetime of skills and talents and dedication, doesn't it? As I said, there is also a significant societal cost, which goes up to 9 billion annually. So there is, this is not the Europe we want. This is not the Europe I want to live in. Europe's future must be one where surviving cancer does not mean starting from the scratch, but continuing building the old life, which the survivors fought so hard to preserve. And this is why we must act now and bring about the change for cancer survivors, our mothers, fathers, friends, wives. There is a pressing need for dedicated policies and support programs to facilitate jobs retention and reintegration for cancer patients and survivors across the EU. And we need to break the stigma and ensure there is no discrimination. So I am happy that today we brought together survivors and advocates and employers and experts united by a single goal, which is to change this narrative and to ensure that survivors are seen, supported, and celebrated, not sidelined by their colleagues and employers. And we are here because we recognize that every survivor deserves a fair chance to continue their professional journey after cancer. And moreover, we are here because supporting workers through a serious illness is not just an obligation, but also a smart and sustainable workplace policy. So, ladies and gentlemen, no one should be forced to choose between their health and their career. with the right support, cancer survivors can continue to thrive professionally and to contribute to their workplaces and communities. And together, let's build the Europe in which work welcomes back every survivor with open arms, and where every journey of healing is met with compassion, with a hope and opportunity. Thank you so much, Miriam.
No, thank you so much to you. And I think, anyone, and I know that we have also panelists in the debate who are cancer survivors, who have already indicated that, something that you said touched a chord, and we will come to you. We obviously, do want to speak to all of our panelists shortly. But firstly, MEP Jerković, you said something there that really, for me, struck a chord. You said no one should fight two battles. I mean, this is such a, basic, fundamental human issue. I mean, do you feel as if sometimes it's, by having this debate, it's sort of reminding ourselves to remember our humanity and how we treat people?
Yeah, it is simple, and it is not, because we need much more than compassion. We need more than words. We need strong policies in place in order to protect cancer patients and cancer survivors. However, in order to get there, we should all start by asking ourselves, what if this was me? What if this was my husband, my sister? So I would say that us being human is a prerequisite to be sensible enough to put this higher on the political agenda. But what we need now is action.
Okay, so, sorry, I hope you caught a little bit of that. I'm trying to keep myself muted so I don't overspeak over you. But when you say action, so what is it? I mean, you do so much within the Parliament. You're one of the MEPs focused on health. When it comes specifically to cancer, what would you like to see you and your colleagues do to ensure that, there are better structures in place, perhaps legislation as well, when it comes to helping and protecting the people that want to get back to work, who have suffered or are suffering with cancer?
Miriam, I would like to see the right to be forgotten to be enshrined as the EU law, because ultimately we all know that there are no guarantees until something becomes a law. We now have good examples of some countries such as France, Spain, Romania, Netherlands, and some others who incorporated the right to be forgotten in national legislation. So I am wondering, why the other countries would not follow their example. They should. I really hope that will happen in the soon future.
Okay, thank you so much. We will leave you there for now, but do stay with us if you can. And then hopefully, I know that many of the people watching, and especially maybe even the panelists, will have questions for you. And of course, we would love for you to wrap up the debate as well. So we will come back to you later. Everyone, obviously we're not with her, but, round of applause to MEP Romana Jerković for obviously your compassion, everything that you do, to support people that do have cancer, living with cancer. Thank you so much. Okay, over to our next speaker then. Please welcome Andrea Broughton. She's the Director of ECRIS and Project Director of the EU study on job retention and return to work for cancer patients and survivors. Please go ahead to introduce, the study. Over to you, Andrea.
Okay, thanks very much, Mariam. And hello, everybody. We're delighted to be here at this really important workshop. It's great to sort of get everybody together and talk about these really important issues. And of course, for cancer patients and survivors, returning to work is an extremely important issue, as we've just heard. So I'm going to present briefly a study that ECRIS and Spark Consulting carried out for the European Commission, so that's DG Santé, working closely with Domenico, who's one of our panelists later, and the European Health and Executive Agency, HADEA. So, sorry, bear with me. Okay, so we could go, I'll explain the objectives of the study in the next slide. Okay, so in general, the aim of the study, it was really to see what was out there. So we've had a quick mention of the different policies in member states. So we wanted to see, looking at the European member states and the 3 EEA EFTA states, so that's Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway, we wanted to see what was already in place in terms of current instruments and interventions on job retention and return to work for cancer patients and survivors, and any planned instruments that are in place. So it was really a sort of ground level, bottom up sort of exercise. The methodology we used was research to do some mapping to see what was there. And then we engaged with stakeholders. So we carried out interviews, and we also showed them in an online survey what we'd collected and asked for their views on it, and asked for their views on any obstacles and challenges to putting these measures into place and to focusing on job retention, return to work. We wanted a specific focus on young workers and patients. We also wanted to look at the gender dimension, and we wanted a focus as well on small and medium enterprises, so SMEs. We held 2 workshops. One was a sort of validation workshop, and the other one was a workshop at the final stages of the study, just to debate what we'd found. We aim to identify at least 10 good practices in policy approaches to tackle these obstacles that we'd found. We wanted to look as well at the transferability of the good practices. In essence, we actually identified 11 good practices and 2 sort of also very good practices, but didn't meet all the criteria we'd set. So yeah, there's a lot of detail in the study. I don't have time to present it all, but I will try to present some of it. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so just a quick overview of our key findings. So we found generally there was a rather sort of a lack of national frameworks, so that's legislative frameworks and policy frameworks relating to job retention and reintegration, specifically looking at cancer patients and survivors in many of the member states. So we did, however, find examples of indirectly applicable legislation that was relevant. So that was things like Employment Equality Acts, or social security benefits, or provisions from the labour codes that apply to all people who are chronically ill and those who've got disabilities, also potentially, obviously, including cancer patients. Many countries do have national cancer strategies or plans, but while not all of them do contain provisions that are relevant to job retention or return to work. Some do, however, and I'll come on to those a bit later. There's a 10-year strategy in France, for example, that looks at this specifically. So there was a lot out there, but there wasn't much that was tailored specifically to cancer patients and return to work. We did find, though, that there were quite a lot of measures identified at the level of individual companies or service providers. So things like workshops, services that were based in the company, and caseworker support that really worked with individuals. So it was really, what we found was largely at company level rather than higher up. And we did find very few prospective policies. So that was, things that were going to be put into place. So they were all things like reforms, policy plans as part of national cancer plans and strategies that are yet to come into practice. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. Okay, well, so what we did when we mapped all the measures, we then put them into clusters. So we identified 3 clusters that you can see there on the screen. So the first was combining work and treatment periods. So this was found to be highly beneficial. Because they supported individuals in combining work, but allowing them to take time off to have their treatment. And the measures there included things like greater flexibility in treatment planning, enhancing support provided by occupational doctors. So you can see there we found national level initiatives in Finland and Netherlands, but also quite a lot of company level policies. So in Czechia, Greece, Spain, Italy, Malta, and Slovakia. So yeah, I can't run through them all, I haven't got time, but there was quite a wide variety, and specifically at company level. The second cluster was employment support and guidance to people with a history of cancer to support them to rejoin the labour market. So that took the form of career guidance and support in the search for a job. So, for example, we found measures in Belgium and Spain. I'll talk a bit more about the Belgian one just a bit later. And then the final cluster was that of workplace adaptations. So, and we found that these adapting the work environment can really enable and facilitate return to work for those with a history of cancer. And that took the form of things like centres for occupational rehabilitation. There was guidance issued via non-profit cooperatives on how to put into place these adaptations and what would be required. Policies on partial resumption of work. So to avoid taking regular breaks in Italy, but trying to avoid the binary sort of 100% working or 0% working, which was seen as very important. Okay, we can go to the next slide now. Okay, so looking at all of these policies, we did, however, find there were some challenges and gaps in what was available. So one thing that really jumped out at us was the lack of flexibility in working arrangements to allow patients to combine work and treatment. This was seen as quite crucial. So there was a lack of tailored support to respond to people's individual needs. So things like flexible, reduced working hours, possibility of working from home or another location, things like that. The second one was health issues, so support with physical health issues, so fatigue, need to take breaks to try to manage the fatigue caused by treatments, the opportunity to attend appointments or therapy sessions that are needed to recover, and of course mental health issues, so anxiety or depression due to the shock of diagnosis, but also treatments. We also found there's a general lack of awareness and knowledge by employers, coupled with difficulty in accessing relevant information on the part of employees, or lack of a dedicated strategy to support cancer patients when they're trying to return to work. So we felt really that improved communication and collaboration between all of those involved, so employees, employers, policymakers, was really fundamental. And then the last point there on this slide is stigma, discriminatory behaviour, and we've already talked a little about this already, both from employers and also from co-workers. So, while you might get formal protection against dismissal by law, there might often be legal loopholes that can be exploited by employers. And also cancer diagnosis can lead to cancer patients and survivors being embarrassed about sharing cancer-related information. So there's a sort of culture of secrecy around that, and making things more difficult than they need be when they're already difficult, of course. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, sorry. So yeah, more challenges and gaps. So employers often have limited resources available to make workplace accommodations and to put into place flexible arrangements. And we found this was particularly the case with smaller companies, which have more limited resources in any case. They face specific challenges that maybe larger companies don't face. There was limited national legislation that focused specifically on job retention, as I've said at the beginning. So while there's general legislation in place, it's often not tailored specifically to cancer and return to work. And we also found that there was multiple cases of multiple discrimination suffered by certain subgroups of cancer patients and survivors. So women, young people, self-employed people, which of course leads to additional challenges. And in the case of young people, there could be then delays in entering the labour market, not having access to traineeships and apprenticeships. And in the case of women, they're more likely to leave their jobs to attend treatment and to take care of their family. Okay, so we can have the next slide. Okay, so when we then turned our attention to finding a selection of good practices, and these are the criteria that we used. So we wanted to sort of have quite a wide variety, and also to ensure that there were good practices overall. So we looked at the type of measure, what it was, so legislative policy, if it was a reintegration policy, a company-based policy. We looked at the level of the measure, so whether it's national, regional, or local. We wanted to get a good geographical balance between the countries we were looking at. We wanted to focus on different types of target groups, including women, young workers, and SMEs. And lastly, we wanted to look at the potential for transferability to other situations. So those are the main criteria that we looked at when we were choosing the good practices. So we can go on to the next slide now. I'm just going to present briefly just a couple of the good practices that we found. There's a lot more detail in the report, I have to say. I don't have that much time to go into it now, but this was one from Belgium. So it was focused on integration and reintegration into the workplace. It was called Rentrée. And it was initially implemented in Flanders, but it's now active in Brussels as well. And it basically focused on giving support for work reintegration to cancer patients and survivors and employers as well. So the way that it did this was through coaching programs, and it was all free. So they had coaches from Rentrée focusing on skilling, reskilling, upskilling, offering training, offering vocational rehabilitation, working with companies to providing company training courses and all different types of coaching, including managerial coaching. So seeing what skills were needed and then trying to work with people to make sure they had those skills to enter the labour market. It was funded by the Flemish Public Service, and it was free of charge, which is also important, of course, because not everybody has resources to pay for coaching and training. So it's seen as very successful. So 1,700 people with a history of cancer have been helped to return to the workplace. 90% of the study participants said they were satisfied to very satisfied, and 71% said that it helped them take steps towards reintegration at work. So that was seen as a very successful measure. And we can go to the next slide, where I'll just present briefly an example from France. So this was the 10-year cancer strategy in France. So there's a particular action that focuses specifically on cancer patients and their return to work. So this was quite rare to find something that was so tailored to what we were looking for. So its objective is to develop systems that enable cancer patients to return to work or retain their job. And it does this by raising awareness among healthcare professionals, looking at flexible working policies to help people to return to work, removing any barriers for schemes that fund workplace accommodations and support job retention. So it held, for example, a conference on living and working with cancer. It published a guidebook published by the French National Cancer Association to help managers to support employees, and that's obviously vital as well. The managers have got the skills and the know-how to support employees returning to work. And yeah, there have been pledges and operational commitments of the Cancer and Work Charter, and so companies representing more than 1.9 million employees have signed up to that. So that is quite a high profile and specifically tailored example from France. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So this is, having digested all this information, we then thought about what was needed in terms of future areas for action, because we recognised there was a lot out there, but there were still gaps and challenges. So from the top, so the policy and legislation, we thought enhancing national policies, especially those tailored to cancer, is really vital for meeting the needs of cancer patients and survivors and to improve services. The second, sort of going round clockwise, communication among stakeholders is vital for sharing the information that we need on patient needs and job opportunities and initiatives, so that needs to be improved. Tailored training is also very important, so for patients, employers and HR staff to understand the challenges that people are facing and to think about the measures that can be implemented that could be effective. Flexible working arrangements, flexible hours, remote working, that's also a really a key issue here. And then going up, guidance, peer support, learning and research, just to improve the conversation and the understanding of what's needed. And then finally, stakeholder community and exchange, so fostering collaboration on key topics that are relevant to job retention and return to work. So that's the study in a bit of a nutshell. The final slide, if you want to read more about it, there's a lot of detail in the study. The link is there. So that's the Sophie Buckingham was the project manager. I was the project director on this, but her email is there if you want any more information on the detail of the study. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you found it interesting.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I think everyone would have found that, the study very, very interesting indeed. You brought up quite a few different things about a lack of, legislative and policy framework across many member states, even though they do have, national strategies, etc. I like the example that you brought up about Belgium having this coaching program. It's something that is such a small, it's not a small thing to do. I mean, obviously companies and, countries or, regions, they need to have the money in place, as you said, but it is such a simple thing that you can do to help people, whether they have cancer or not. And I think that was very important to highlight. But I wanted to ask you, first of all, did you find any sort of surprises when you were collating all the data and looking at what the member states are doing? Was there anything that specifically made you and your team, stop and think?
I think that we were maybe a little bit surprised that there wasn't more that focused specifically on cancer and return to work. I mean, I think we were hoping to find more examples of policy and legislation, and it was in the end quite difficult to find that. I mean, there were some isolated examples. I mentioned the French example, which was very much the sort of thing we were looking for. But I mean, as was said at the very beginning, if you haven't got the legislation in place, then, it's difficult. You need that really as a basis. So, I mean, we did find a lot of really good examples of things and company level issues, which was great. But often, as we know, you do need a legislative basis in order to support what happens then at more local level. So I think we were a little bit surprised that there wasn't more that was specifically tailored to cancer. And we, would be hoping. I mean, there were a couple of things that were in the pipeline, but there was a lot of general anti-discrimination legislation. But of course, you'd expect that because that responds to EU directives. But it seemed a bit of a shame there wasn't more that was actually tailored so much.
Do you think that perhaps we're in a scenario where we understand that we have discrimination laws in place, therefore there's a lack of awareness to then create the specific legislation needed to help people living with cancer? Do you think that's probably a problem?
I think that people don't tend to engage with it unless they may be suddenly confronted with the situation. So, for example, if you have a small employer, you might, obviously they've got policies in place, they've got anti-discrimination, they might have sort of certain health policies in place, but suddenly if you have an employee who is, diagnosed and has specific issues, wants to continue, I think that companies suddenly become, they think they don't quite know what to do because they haven't got those specific things in place. They haven't thought about it because they haven't had to. So I suppose really in that circumstance, then it is quite good to have something in place like a network or some sort of information provision where, support for employers that they can go to, think, we've now got this situation that we weren't expecting. We don't know what to do, because employers are by and large, of course, they want to comply, they want to help, and they don't know where to turn. So if there is support in place, or they can go somewhere and get help and advice, that can help them to then respond in the appropriate way. But it's something you don't do it until you need to.
Yeah. Well, you brought up vulnerable groups. You brought up young people, women, and then of course, I think you said self-employed. How do we help those people, especially the self-employed? Because obviously, even if you look at, the sort of provisions that are in place, for people that are self-employed, women or young people, they sort of fall within the lines or below the lines. They sort of seem to get forgotten. So how can a study like this, you've highlighted it, you've sort of marked it for people can see, but what would you suggest to member states? Is there, I mean, obviously I understand again, especially, I mean, this is a study, and when we talk about the EU, we talk about the role of the Commission, there's that phrase we always use that, health is a national competence, but there's sort of a nudge that can come, from the EU. So what would you perhaps like to see done?
Yeah, I think it is difficult. I think that it would be good to have some more sort of joined up communication. I mean, things like this workshop really help because there's a lot of exchange of ideas and thinking about what can be done. So communication is really key between the different countries, and countries can learn from each other. I mean, some countries do have quite interesting things in place, and hopefully the study will highlight that. But yes, of course, health is a national competence, so there's not going to be a lot of overarching directives on this specifically. But I think, yeah, exchange and communication is probably key to sort of going forward together and thinking, oh, yes, that works in that situation, so it might work for us as well. And of course, on the issue of self-employed, it is very difficult because they're not employees, so they're not covered by, legislation that would cover employees. But again, if there are networks and sort of information provision that are out there to help self-employed specifically, then that is somewhere that they can turn. But yeah, I'm sure self-employed people would feel very much on their own, really, because they won't have an employer that they can go to and that can support them.
Indeed. And then, just making sure that I was unmuted. And then I was just saying that, of course, money is also then an issue then as well. If you are someone that is self-employed, returning to work after having a massive illness as well, you probably wouldn't have been, earning anything during that time. You wouldn't have been getting sick pay. So I think there's a lot that we can discuss there. Just to let everyone know who's joining that, the link to the study that Andrea was talking about there, the European Commission 24 study on job retention and returning to work is available. Just look at the link there. Andrea, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to maybe highlight or say about the study?
No, I think in the space available, I've tried to highlight the key points, but please, read the study if you'd like to know more. And thanks very much for the discussion.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Okay, we'll allow you to mute yourself now. Thank you so much for making that presentation for us, which is obviously helping to form the basis for the discussion with the panel now. So it's my pleasure now to dive into the conversation with the panelists. Panelists, I will allow all of you, of course, to make your opening remarks, introduce yourself to our audience, and also to introduce yourselves to each of the panelists as well. If you would like as well to perhaps comment on the study, please feel free to do so in your opening statement as well. Okay, so joining me are Domenico Fiorenza. He does need to leave early, I've understood as well, so please do let us know when you do need to leave the debate. He's the Policy Officer for Cancer at DG Sante at the European Commission. Thank you for joining us. We have Krzysztof Kowalski. He's the Head of Health Service Research at the German Cancer Society. We also have Veronika Foot. She's the Head of Policy and Consulting working with cancer. And then finally, but not least, we have Atife Sadeghi. She's a cancer survivor and patient advocate at Inspire to Live. So I'll ask you all to speak in order of introduction. So we'll go with Domenico first. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mariam. Just to flag, I will just need to leave maximum 5 minutes earlier, so I will be here most of the time. Just if there are any questions, rather to give them early on. I hope everyone can hear and see me well. My connection is sometimes a bit feeble. Okay, great. So I'm Domenico. I'm working as a policy officer for DG Sante. I'm working at the Cancer, Health and All Policies team based in Luxembourg. And I want to give a bit more of background why this study was included in the cancer plan and the wider policy framework, let's say. So the cancer plan was adopted in February 2021. We are in the 5th year of adoption now already. And the rationale of this study was already a bit explained by the opening remarks from MEP Jerković. Given that luckily we have a growing number of cancer survivors, so that we indeed can and should focus on quality of life, which is one of the main pillars of the cancer plan. And employment being one very, very important aspect for your quality of life, and also given the growing number of people being diagnosed in their working age. So this was a topic that needed to be included. So why another study? Maybe a valid question. We did have some previous very, very excellent work from the European Union Agency on Safety and Health at Work. However, this gets outdated very quickly. So we have before the study, we had no recent overview. What's actually the legislation? What's the frameworks? What's the individual level measures in member states, at regional level, at company level? So the first idea was really to update that knowledge. Then we did not have a fully comprehensive overview. We had a selection of several member states, but really EU-wide and going beyond the EU. That was another novelty. And then the additional aspects that the study focused on, like the focus on younger people being more vulnerable, the gender dimension, and also looking specifically at small and medium enterprises. So that was another important aspect that we wanted to highlight, especially in this study. For the study itself, I also would like to thank Andrea and her team. We have very fruitful, very good collaboration on the study, also with my colleague Sushma from the Health and Digital Executive Agency. It was a very rewarding work, I have to say, to follow the study from the Commission side. Also because it's a topic that's very, very close and very tangible for everyone, I want to say. Everyone has, if not affected themselves, everyone has friends, has colleagues, has family who are affected by cancer and who have to struggle how to really make their normal lives still work despite of the diagnosis and potential side effects. And then I wanted to remark a few findings that were also important for us. First of all, not surprising at all, of course, that to see again the many challenges that cancer patients, cancer survivors face in the workplace. But still, I think it was good to see that those go also beyond health issues. So it's not only a lack of flexible working arrangements, more the physical level, let's say, but also the fears and stigma that people face. So I think that was one important aspect that was good to be highlighted again and to be made aware of. Then in terms of specific frameworks, I have to agree with Andrea. It was for us also surprising to see that there was actually a little number of cancer-specific measures where I think it needs to be examined. Are these frameworks applicable for cancer patients and survivors? So our question was always, when we saw a measure proposed, that's interesting, that's good to know, but does it also concern people with cancer? And I think that's the important next step to make this information more accessible and to make people aware. Does it apply to the individual case? Is it actually of help, or do we need a specific framework really for people with cancer? I found it also surprising that there was quite a low number of prospective measures. So we asked to see both existing measures and prospective measures to have a bit of a flavor what's actually upcoming. Because we saw there was a lot of momentum coming from Europe's Beating Cancer Plan to also have changed at national level. So yeah, that's what our interest was, to see is anything happening in the near future. And we were actually surprised to see that not much was identified, at least in the study. So I think that shows that there's scope for action, definitely.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go to our next panelist, Christoph, please, for some opening remarks.
Yes, thank you, Mariam. So my name is Christoph Kowalski, and I'm the head of the Health Services Research Department at the German Cancer Society. And I am also the chair of the sub-issue, so to speak, of the Association of European Cancer Leagues on Cancer and Work. As you know, the ECL is organized in working groups. One of the working groups is the Patient Support Working Group, and the subsection of that is Cancer and Work. I'd like to say some things about the German Cancer Society, how this fits into what we are doing on a national, but also on a international level. And then, yes, give some ideas on the study and where we may want to continue working on. So the German Cancer Society is a non-profit organization that engages in cancer care. We have over 8,000 members, mostly practitioners, but also researchers and others that engage in improving cancer care. We are not a patient organization, so this is important, but a professional led organization, but patients are represented in all our working groups. For example, the DKG, the German Cancer Society, coordinates oncology guideline development in Germany. And in these working groups, patients are represented. We also run the largest certification system for cancer centers, with centers not only in Germany, but in other European countries as well. And we make sure that psychosocial care is included in all centers. And this is something that touches on the point of return to work. So with social workers and psycho-oncologists, but especially here important social workers, that assist patients in providing essential support from the point of diagnosis on, so very early on. And this includes then physical rehabilitation as well as support in work-related issues. And another important structure that we have in Germany, and that is also taking place under the umbrella of the German Cancer Society, is that the regional cancer societies in Germany, so 16 for each Bundesland one, they all run cancer counseling centers that provide psychosocial care at all stages of the disease, and that are free of charge. So patients can go there whenever they want and seek assistance in job-related issues. In the Health Services Research Department, among other things, we look at numbers on return to work rates, for example, but we're also developing specialized support programs for patients that seek advice at these cancer counseling centers, and then make use of specially trained counselors that, for example, accompany patients to their employer if that's necessary, for example. So they really can dedicate a lot of time to assisting them. That being said, I think is one thing that we need to take into account, that when we're talking about legislation and specific legislation for cancer patients, I'm not totally convinced that this is the solution. There may be some aspects where it is important to have specific legislation because we know that cancer is different from other diseases, but there are also many things that are very similar to other diseases that affect young patients. So we really have to be careful what to do there, what we see. And one reason why we have these, why the European Cancer Leagues, the member leagues, are so active, is that we have often legislation in place that is really complicated. So it's really difficult for patients to understand what's going on. There are many things they are eligible for, but to find out what it really is, that needs assistance. And that's why, for example, so all our member leagues provide assistance, for example, hotlines or websites or people who help them. But this is really something where we have to invest probably more, that we really make sure that everyone that is eligible for benefits or for assistance really gets it. And if these structures, for example, keep specific patient groups from using it because it's difficult to assess them, then we create again inequality that we see during active treatment and rehabilitation and so on. So we really have to make sure that everyone who's entitled to really gets what he or she deserves, to make sure that patients have the best quality of life, and part of this is often being part of the workforce.
Okay, thank you very much. Interesting points on legislation. We'll come to that question a bit later. But next, I'll hand the floor over to Veronica.
Hello, thank you. Good morning. So I'm Veronica Foot, and I'm the head of policy consulting at Working with Cancer, which is a not-for-profit social enterprise based in London. And we work across Europe and North America, supporting organizations and individuals. I come today, I bring not only 20 years professional experience in this space, but also personal experience, both as a patient and now as a caregiver. So this is a topic very close to home, unfortunately. Balancing treatment, recovery, and work has taught me something very vital, that work is not just about financial security, it's also about your own personal dignity, and maintaining that hope, and that identity of who you are. And as the MEP said earlier, millions of us across Europe are diagnosed with cancer every year, and more, unfortunately, are of working age. Cancer is no longer a disease of those who are in retirement. And thanks to better treatments and survival rates are improving. But workplaces need to move away from just awareness building to real action, and making sure that survivors and caregivers can thrive and not just survive within the workplace. So at Working with Cancer, we support many organizations, many employers in creating inclusive workplaces by developing Working with Cancer policies and guidelines. We train managers and HR professionals about how to deal with cancer in the workplace. And we do a lot of coaching of employees who are affected by cancer. We've seen, though, even small actions within the small organizations, not just the big multinationals, but the small, medium and mid-sized enterprises, they can have a significant impact to an employee's quality of life. So it's that flexibility that my colleagues have discussed earlier, open communication, and above all, compassionate leadership. And these can transform the experience of employees affected by cancer. But unfortunately, as many of you have already said today, the barriers still persist. And this is why we're here. Above all, the stigma of having cancer is even though we speak about cancer every day, and 1 in 2 of us will be affected by it, is still predominant. Then you have inconsistent support from managers in the same organization that even have some policies, how your experience of as an employee will be impacted by your manager. That's why training managers is also very important. And in some organizations, there really are limited flexible options, particularly for caregivers, because cancer doesn't just affect those who are directly related to the patient, but if you are a primary caregiver, at the last minute, you've got to take your loved one to hospital or treatment or help them. They also need to be covered in this debate. But we're not talking about just a human issue. This is a business issue, and where employers need to wake up. So with 1 in 2 of us going to be infected by cancer in our lifetime, this employers need to start thinking about this from a workforce planning perspective. But we talked about legislation earlier. My colleagues talked about the lack of legislation. Well, I'm here in the UK, and although hope to be back in the EU one day soon, but we do have the Equality Act of 2010. And in the Equality Act, it's specifically written that people who are protected, if you have a cancer diagnosis, you are protected from the moment of diagnosis for your lifetime as a recognized disability. So a failure to support employees can bring serious legal, reputational, and operational risks. That's why employees, have to be aware of this. But there is good news out there. Many employees that we work with are leading by example, and nearly 2,000 employees that we work with have signed the Working with Cancer Pledge. This is where organizations make a public commitment, both to their employees, but also externally, to support employees impacted by cancer. Now, many organizations are at different places along this continuum. Some it would just be from offering flexible working arrangements and phased returns, because we talked about this, but it's not just, well, one day you're off and then the next day you're back 100%. You have to, the return journey can be very long. Making reasonable adjustments. Now, that's very different if you're working in an office or working in a factory or working in a restaurant or something like that in hospitality. But making those reasonable adjustments in the workplace can help employees. but also creating a culture of empathy and openness, so to get across and overcome those issues of stigma, and then providing real support programs for employees, including the long-term sick. But what I see is there's momentum, and I've been working in space now for many years, that across Europe, the policies to reinforce these expectations are changing. So, when I look at the EU legislation on work-life balance directive, which was a very clear one, to the European Beating Cancer Plan, where survivorship is a key pillar to that. And also the right to be forgotten, especially when it comes to financial services, are important pillars of legislation. But I think when we're thinking about where beating cancer is impossible, we must also make thriving at work possible too. And so that's why I'm really happy to be part of this discussion now, that we have to invest in the policies, the leadership, and the compassion. So we're not only supporting our people to build stronger and more resilient organizations for the future, but it also makes a business its benefit as well. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I do actually have a question for you on compassion, but I will hold it because I want to make sure that Atife also makes an introduction. So please, Atife, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Atife. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and discuss this topic, which is very personal to me. As you know, I am a cancer survivor. And I first want to also thank our MEP Romana for the touching words of recognizing what cancer patients and survivors go through and what is actually needed. This study is very brilliant, and I can pretty much agree with everything that so far has been said, but I can also doubt a lot of points that are specifically about legislation. I was surprised by the points that Belgium is kind of outstanding with what is in place already. I live in Belgium, I work in Belgium, excuse me. So for that, I want to give you a little bit of my story, which is my lived experience of cancer and what I painfully refer to as cancer is a hell, but my return to work was a bigger hell. I was not affected by cancer as much as I was affected by the situation I faced when I returned to work. It's almost 2 years now a year and a half now that I've survived cancer, and I have not recovered from the situation that I faced at work. And it's still touching me today. I didn't plan to be like this right now, but I'm hearing the voice, I'm hearing the compassion put in place in different organizations to help people like us cancer survivors, because as many of you said, it's not just about surviving cancer. It's about quality of life. It's about the normalcy that I wanted to grab right the moment they told me, okay, the results are good, no more chemo. So what I did the next day was calling my director, like, I'm ready to come back to work. And that's what I was feeling. I was fine. I had gone through my immunotherapy. I had gone through my chemotherapy, and that there was a period of 6 weeks when I finished the last chemo, and the final results said, okay, you're clear. And at that moment, a cancer patient, as I lived it and experienced it, I wanted to grab back my life. And part of my life, a big part of my life was my job. I wanted to go back to work and feel normal. And it was around the end of the year, and I was literally pushed back. I don't know yet if by legislation I can go to them and say, oh, you couldn't do that. I wanted to come back to work right away. But when I called the director and he told me like, oh, Atife, let this sink in. Like, let what sink in? Everything has sank in for me. I've been fighting this battle. And as Romana said, nobody should fight a second battle after such an ordeal. But then I was pushed back. I was immediately rejected by the words, oh no, well, it's better if you don't come back now. These words are decorative. They are performative. They're like, we care so much about you and your health that we want you to focus on that. Well, I know, my medical team knows, we know what I need right now, what I want to do right now. That's my life. So allow me to decide. And that's something that is really of concern to me, that should not be neglected. Let the cancer patients and survivors be the ones who can decide. There is a lot going on. There is no one cancer. There is no one treatment. And there is no one personality, one lifestyle that we can prescribe something to for everybody. So the first thing is hearing, what I would say is hearing the cancer patient first, hearing the cancer survivors first. What can they do? And then trusting them that they're able, they know best their body and everything, and they're able to do what they're up for doing, live the life as they know it and as they want to live it. So I was pushed back, and when you feel you're unwelcome, so you're like, okay, and I was not in the mood to start fighting another battle. So I sat back, I waited another 2 months, and I eventually went back after 2 months. So I wasted 2 months just because I was not welcomed. And that 2 months at least allowed my hair to grow back a little bit, and I still wanted to go back to work while the offices were not that full because people were on holidays. So I would get, easy with my appearance. I could talk to a few colleagues who knew what I was going through. And I had no stigma about cancer. I was very honest and transparent from the moment I was diagnosed, and let alone that I was misdiagnosed for a long time. I was honest with my managers and everyone. Okay, this is the information and I'm going to be off, but I want to be able to work the times that I can work. I didn't know how it would go, but I could imagine that during my treatment, there will be times that I could maybe attend one meeting a week, that I keep on the project. I was a project manager, that I keep on what's going on about the project. But even that was not allowed. So yes, Belgium has that system that, you can work partially. But again, who would go start a legal battle when they have just come through that to just convince their employers, let me come back to work 20% of time, or let me work during my treatment 20% of time because the policy is there, or maybe even the legislation is there. And quite frankly, I'm very pleased about the study. The information is there, but I'm tired of hearing all these things and all these policies. As long as there is no accountability and there is no sort of penalty for employers doing such things to their cancer patients or any patient, any person who has something different. Mariam, you started with pointing discrimination, and the whole thing goes back to inclusion. If there is no inclusion, then everything is going wrong. Even if we put together a specific cancer patient support legislation and policies, when there is no inclusion and companies get by and get along with whatever they can perform, that, okay, this is our quota, this is what we are doing, we are a very inclusive company, nothing changes. Nothing changes. So I'm here to help by sharing my story, to help fixing the situation, not just for cancer patients, for anyone who deals with anything that is different to the normal, so that they can be supported. So first I was pushed back. Then when I went back to work, part of it goes back, I feel like this was a bit underrepresented, that, okay, companies don't know what to do. Part of it is true. They don't know. But if we're talking about smaller and medium-sized companies, yeah, that could be the case. But they are also usually more human in the sense of supporting one another. Where I worked was a giant company, and they have all the system, all the policies in place. Everything you can think of is there. All the Belgian provisions of return to work, the support to return to work, there is Mensura, that you can get consultations with. I didn't need any of that. And what I needed was a supportive environment. What I needed was going back to the unit I was back in. With them, I faced with no reintegration. Belgium has a reintegration system. There was no integration in plan. I try to create the image for you. Maybe you can understand a bit better. I go back to work during the holidays time. I just hang out with some of my colleagues, feeling good. They're supportive, the colleagues at that level. And then the managers come back after the holidays. I go back to the office the first day of the return from holidays. I bring chocolate in because I'm celebrating health. I'm going there in my full positive and happy spirit that, hey, I'm fine. I'm here to, do my job again. I'm a professional, so don't undermine me just because of cancer. I go back in and there is literally no single meeting even arranged for me. Forget about a welcome back. No single meeting to tell me, oh, you're back. So this is what we've been thinking that you could do now, or tell us how we can support you. Nothing. And then they started punishing me for asking around to someone at higher levels, like emailing someone at higher level. Okay, can someone tell me what's going on? Can someone tell me what I can start with now? And eventually the situation got worse and worse because I'm someone who speaks up. I don't shut up when there is injustice. I'm sorry, I don't, and I never would, especially not after going through cancer. So I speak up, I ask for solutions, and I'm rejected, I'm neglected, my unit is changed. I'm a project manager mostly in different policy projects, but also in pharmaceuticals, as I'm a pharmaceutical scientist as well. And but they switched my unit to software engineering. And what legislation is there to stop employers from doing that when they say, oh, well, changes happen. There is a system in Belgium. Changes happen when you return to cancer. Of course, things happen. Things change. Employers also need to adjust based on their needs. I want to hold employers accountable. There are a lot of loopholes in already existing legislations even, and policies are not enough. So I'm putting this software engineering project management, and I don't know how to describe it even. Every day was a battle that I had never had to live in my life. And I keep repeating, the cancer was a hell, but going through what I went through at my work ordeal was even a bigger hell. It was a complete discrimination, but the question is, where do I refer to when this is happening? The Belgian system has mensura. If you go to mensura, your company will be informed. And when your company is also informed, then you're in bigger trouble. There is retaliation. And this company has everything in their policies and charter and human rights and everything in place that says there is no retaliation. They also have a speak up system that you can use to say something is happening. We need a solution. But that would also turn back against you. What a person in that situation should do. And eventually what goes on, my complaints go on internally. I'm trying to find a solution. Every day, my mental health is deteriorating hour by hour from the way my managers treat me. And I'm talking about upper management level, not even middle management, but upper management levels. So it gets close to...
If I may, let's go to our colleague Domenico. I mean, honestly, Atife, what I would say is we're hearing and listening to what you're saying, and it's shocking, and it sounds like the worst case scenario possible. Although, just as I say that, I think, well, perhaps there are even worse cases out there. So, Domenico, I'll come to you then. I mean, Atife is one of the 12 million cancer survivors. This study that you have is trying to identify and apply to. You also spoke about, in your opening statement, Domenico, you spoke about the challenges of cancer patients. What really can the European Commission do? So you've got this study, but what can you physically do? Because there are so many loopholes and levers. I mean, even just within employment laws, within national employment laws, there's so many loopholes and levers. On the one hand, your study, highlights Belgium, the Flemish public service, as having this really good coaching program. But then when you hear a personal story like Atafe's, it seems as if, who are the good guys, and where can people find solutions so that they don't get discriminated in the workplace?
Thank you, Mariam. And thank you, Atife. It was indeed very, very moving to listen to your story. I'm sorry you had to go through all of this, but also I want to applaud your courage to speak openly about it. I think it's very, very important to make people aware, and that will be, I have to say, as little as it sounds, the issue of awareness raising will be one of the main tasks at EU level. And that's also one of the main things we hope to spark with that study, because I think Atife's example shows we may have the good legislation, we may have even good policies and frameworks at company level in place, but if the individual manager, if the individual employer does not care, they will find a loophole. So I think it's also to work at very specific individual level to provide training, to make people aware of these issues that people are facing. And so the first step on really at EU level is to spread the word, to disseminate this study. And I can also show that we are speaking to member states. We are having just next month we will have a conversation with representatives from the Ministry of Health to present again the results of this study, and also to have a discussion. So what's next at national level? What are you doing in the member states? Are there any reactions to the study? Anything that you would like to plan as the next steps? And also I would like to highlight what I think Andrea said in the beginning. Webinars such as this one is what we need exactly to reach more people and to make them aware. And thank you again, Atife. I think that's one of the best examples. A study is very abstract, very general, but to hear a very specific example that's needed. And as I said, it takes a lot of courage to speak out to a room full of people, virtual or not, and share your experience.
Dominica, I wanted to follow up on something that you also talked about. I mean, obviously, you know, we had this study, we went through it with the presentation. One of the things I think you also spoke about was that you looked at existing and prospective measures, and especially the prospective measures were really low, that not many member states are actually, you know, going ahead with action. I mean, why do you think that really is the case? I mean, can we simply, you know, if we're trying to be kind, can we say that it's simply a case of lack of resources right now? Because there is a lot going on in the world. You know, budgets are constrained. You know, people are living very hard lives at the moment. I mean, obviously, that doesn't then help cancer survivors because we need to do more for them. But is there perhaps a reason why we don't see this from member states?
I mean, I can just speculate. We did not really go into the reasons why there was not more. So this would require some more research. Actually, why didn't you plan anything? And this is something that we can also raise with member states. One might be the resource question. If we look at the cancer plan, it's so broad. There are so many actions, and the focus has to be somewhere. So that might be one issue. And the other, maybe referring also to what Christoph said in the beginning, that general measures might apply to cancer patients, and indeed it might not always be the best solution to have something very targeted for a specific diagnosis and exclude other diseases. I mean, I'm not the expert in labor law or anything, so I really don't dare to judge, but I think that's an open question. Where do we actually need cancer-specific frameworks, and where do general laws and frameworks apply? But we need better information, better access, both for the patients and for the employer side. What does apply, and where something specific, something additional needed.
Okay, well, let's keep on this idea of providing some sort of framework or legislation. And I want to bring in all the other panelists because also I can see that the clock is against us. So Christoph and Veronica, I'll come to you. And Atife, obviously, please join in as well. So we do Christoph first, then Veronica, then Atife. So my question to both of you is, well, Christoph, you said, I think in your opening statement that you didn't feel as if specific cancer legislation is needed. I wanted perhaps to ask you to clarify why you think that is the case, because I think if we're looking at what people are saying, there needs to be some sort of legislation in place, perhaps, but why you think that's not the case. And then Veronica, I think you also spoke about these support programs. And the question to you then would be, is that perhaps the better lever to try to ensure that there are support programs, whether it's national level or literally the company level? And is that more a, less expensive, or time-consuming way to get change and action? So so I start with you first of all, Christoph, then Veronica, and then Atife.
So don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that I don't think that this is a good solution, but I'm saying that I'm not so sure that this is the best or the sole solution that we should focus so much on, because for example, what Atife mentioned was accountability. And accountability, when she was talking about accountability, she meant her company and the managers and so on. But may even go one level higher to several levels higher to the member states. They are not accountable for example, their return to work rates. Why are they not, for example, being made accountable for return to work rates after cancer? Because we don't know what the return to work rates after cancer. This is very disturbing, talking about return to work where we know so little about what in numbers is really going on. We have very good data on cancer incidence. We have very good data on cancer mortality, for example. We can compare these across countries. We can see how the member states perform when it comes to diagnostics or to treatments to survival, but we have very little ideas when it comes to return to work. And this is one thing that the ECL is working on finding a good definition of return to work, because it's always the question, when are we looking at returning to work? So what's the time point we're looking at? Are we looking at return to work after 6 months, after 1 year or so? And then what is return to work in terms of hours worked per week, for example? Is someone who was full-time employed before the diagnosis, when he or she returns to work and only works like half, 50% or so, is he or she then a 50% return to work person? There's so much insecurity, and this is also, it's important to clarify this to, for example, assess how well the interventions work. We have this collection of very well thought through interventions in the report, but we can say very little about how effective they are, because we lack the measurements to really assess what they change. So this is something where I'd say we need more research, and we need solid numbers, and it's not impossible to collect the numbers, and then we can not only focus on saying let's get better legislation, but also to just compare countries, see, okay, what works there, what doesn't work there, and learn from each other, as we do in many other areas of policymaking.
Indeed, Veronica.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to return to Atife's intervention. So thanks very much for speaking up, and you very brave, and you illustrated, unfortunately, the story that it's a very common story, unfortunately. And even if countries have legislation and companies have policies, we hear stories like yours. And increasingly, and it's not an advice I would say widely, but increasingly, one of the most difficult things that companies value is their reputation. And we do have brave souls who, even despite after their cancer diagnosis and treatment, are treated badly. If the legal framework allows it, they go and they take the employer to court. Now, that is sometimes very heavy and it's very stressful afterwards. But we also have social media, and we are seeing employers are being called out. You go onto Instagram, TikTok, or whatever. An employer will want to protect his reputation. And sometimes we get employers coming to us too late when they've treated an employee, a manager has treated someone not well, and they're trying to, we want to do this and that, well, maybe you should have thought about this earlier. Anyway, so I think there is a democratization within cancer patients now. I would always say that a company's reputation takes years to build and can go in a second. So, if you have a justified complaint, social media can also be an ally. That said, I also want to pick up on what Christoph said about return to work statistics. I would strongly advocate that return to work should be like a PRO, a patient-reported outcome. It should be part of survivor statistics. And unless you measure this, you have no idea. So, for example, while you were speaking, Christoph, a couple of data points. Here in the UK, fewer than 60% of cancer patients are still in work 1 year after they're diagnosed. That means over 40% have lost their jobs or will not return to work. And then even after that, when you look at the workforce, 53% of people living with cancer experience their job loss within the 5 years after diagnosis. That is significantly higher than the general population. So, and unless for policymakers like Romana, MEP Jerković and others, this is important that this data is on their radar screen, because that's when you are able to make change with that. But you made a comment, Mariam, about what can be done, and I think there are a lot of support programs at a local level within an employer, and whether it be done through a lot of employers have their own what we call cancer cafes and support networks, and whether it be also with occupational health and or coaching or buddying systems. So if you are in a supportive employer, there is a lot that can be done to ensure that the person returning to work, or that it has all that support there. But I think that's not going to also help in examples like Atafe as well. So I don't know if that helps cover the question that you were asking. But I think there are a lot of really great best practices. One other really strong best practice I would also advocate for employers, especially even medium-sized employers, is to bringing on-site screening. Now I know that in our we all have socialized healthcare and our health services are there, but a lot of employers, best practice employers, will bring on to do on-site skin cancer screening, breast cancer screening, prostate cancer screening, and that becomes an integral part of their policies, because prevention and early detection, as we all know, is key. And so employers can help to do that and support healthcare systems. So anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, as well, I can see that, this has been such I would say a great conversation. But obviously we are time constrained. Veronica, just very, very quickly. First of all, thank you for mentioning social media. That was one of my questions to all of you as well. That, if you can't fight the big company, you can fight them online, because that hurts their bottom dollar. Yeah. 100%. I mean, I'm not advocating for people to get nasty, but I think you need to have levers there. And when you are an individual, you have power as well. There is a question for you from the chat, Veronica. Someone asks, is there any national legislation that contemplates support for the caregivers? They're an essential part of the recovery of patients and survivors. And the other thing that I would tag onto that is, I know people that are caregivers, they've had to basically give up their jobs. So, the UK, it's a, welfare state. Are there also provisions that people perhaps can apply for as caregivers?
Yeah. So I actually, and I know this, and there are the member states across the EU that provide this too. But last year, the UK just introduced a Caregiver Act, that it's the caregiver's right to ask for. I mean, it's not enough, but it's a start. 5 days unpaid leave a year for caregiving outside of any other provisions. But I actually think, although the focus here is on patients, and I know this myself, if a caregiver doesn't have the appropriate support, if the patient doesn't have the appropriate support from a caregiver, that actually puts an extra burden on society, because then an ambulance has to come out and pick up a patient to take them to their appointment, where if a caregiver can take time off of work, it's a much affordable and a quicker way. So in the overall system. So, but there are some countries that have this legislation. The UK is one of them, but it's not enough. I don't know.
It took a while for me to unmute myself. Okay, so we know that one of our panelists has already had to leave, Domenico, from the European Commission's DG Sante. We thank him, of course, for being there. I'll ask Atafe to sort of give the final sort of comment from the panel, and then I'll allow MEP Romana to close for us. Atafe, I mean, obviously, you're the person in our panel who is the actual cancer survivor. You're also a patient advocate. So what is really your message, to anyone who is listening?
First to the, well, legislators, everyone in the power of making an actual difference in the policy and legislation, we needed a strict. We needed a strict. It's thank you for the encouragement and calling me brave, and some people call it stupid, to be honest, that I speak up about it. I do use social media, LinkedIn. I post about what I went through. And what happens when I post what has happened so far, that I've been threatened by the company. I've been threatened for speaking up for the reputation that you say they care about. So here is one example again that I'm using my LinkedIn, just talking about my experience and what I went through. And because there are so many loopholes, there's either no legislation for that, or there are so many loopholes in the law in Belgium, they can just go by, aggress me and harass me and send me threats. So this needs to stop. I don't want anybody else to go through anything like what I've been through. That's the problem, is not cancer. The cancer is a situation that happens and there are solutions to it. Hopefully for most of it, there are solutions, there are treatments. You know, there is an answer. I even told my manager, like, you know, I survived cancer, but I'm surviving this work environment because I'm telling you, there is a situation. You're denying it because you don't want to solve it. And with cancer, the doctors, the medical team will come and tell you, okay, you have cancer. These are the possible treatments and these are the possible outcomes. You know what you're dealing with. But when you go back to work and at every single day, something new is thrown at you, you're mistreated, you are facing abuse of power by the superiors, then there is no legislation to really protect you and that you can actually take it up, then there's nothing much you can do and you can continue suffering long after surviving cancer, and not suffering from cancer, but from that. And to every cancer patient and survivor there, stand up for your voice. Do recognize your own voice and your own needs, whether or not you need to go back to work immediately or you want to take more rest. Just do as you feel is the best for you, because you know yourself better, you know your situation better, and you must be honest with yourself first and foremost. And then you can create the situation for yourself with the help of, hopefully not in the long future, but now, today, to have the legislations that can support us. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, listen, we are going to wrap up here and I'll hand over to MEP. But before I do, obviously, thank you to all of our speakers, to the MEPs Against Cancer group, and of course, ECL, the Association of European Cancer Leagues, literally for once again thinking so mindfully about the need to really humanize what cancer sufferers and survivors go through. I mean, today we're talking about something that's really such a basic issue to show humanity, especially in the workplace. So, you know, kudos to really everyone who's been involved for raising this issue and for everyone who's participating in this debate. You know, of course, we thank, you know, MEP Romana Jerković for her leadership within the MAC group, and of course her team for doing everything that they do behind the scenes. ECL will also publish its own recommendations, so do look out for that. Audience, we thank you for being with us. Sorry we couldn't get to more of your questions, but thank you for supporting this conversation on supporting cancer patients and, of course, the survivors in the workplace and the challenges and best practices that Europe can, of course, put in place for them. We hope that this conversation has perhaps helped, you know, turn the page or, you know, maybe lead to some real action in the future. And, of course, if you want to follow up on the debate, you will be able to see the recording on ECL's YouTube channel. It's been my pleasure to host the debate. With that, I'll hand over to MEP Jerković to close.
Thank you. Thank you, Mariam. Maybe I'm here. Maybe you can't see me well because I moved to my office, but there is too much light and it's important that you hear me well. Well, I would like to thank you all who made this event possible, to you, Mariam, to European Cancer League, to all our speakers. But I would especially like to thank to you, ATFEG. Thank you for your powerful testimony, reminded us that behind every cancer statistics, behind every numbers is always a real and personal story, a human life. And as I told you in the chat, you inspired me. Your story motivates me to work even harder, because I believe that progress is possible when we listen each other, when we collaborate, when we work together and lead with empathy. And once again, I want to thank you all for your contribution and determination. We discussed a very important topic. Returning to work is not just simply a question of policy or a law, but of dignity and hope. And we all have a collective responsibility to ensure that millions of cancer survivors are not left alone to navigate the system. And you said, Atef, that you passed through the hell. The cancer is the hell, but what you experienced after, it was even worse. So no one should left to fight this battle alone, because it's a question of a social justice. Thank you once again for being part of this important meeting and discussion. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Mariam.
Okay, thank you all so much. Thank you, MEP Romana. Okay, with that, we will close this debate. As I said, you can always follow the recording, which will be made available online. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. Goodbye.